How did Lot's wife become a salt statue? A long time ago, in a fertile valley surrounded by mountains, there was a city called Sodom. At first glance, it was a place full of life, with overcrowded markets, lively streets, and large houses. But if you looked closer, you could feel something dark in the air. The people of Sodom had left God behind, and instead, they lived doing all kinds of evil, without worrying about what was right. At that time, there lived a man named Lot, nephew of the great patriarch Abraham. Lot was not like the others in Sodom. His heart still sought to do the right thing in front of God. However, he had chosen to live in that city, thinking that the fertile valley would be a good place to prosper. But as the years went by, Lot realized that his decision had put him in the middle of a land full of evil. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and the shadows grew longer, Lot was sitting by the city gates, as he often did. From there, he watched the people come and go, with a thoughtful expression on his face. Suddenly, in the distance, he saw two men walking towards the city. But these were not ordinary men. Their walk was calm and firm, and their tunics shone as if the sun touched them in a special way. Lot immediately stood up, as if an invisible force forced him to act. He approached the men and, with a respectful inclination, said to them, "My lords, please come to my house. It is not safe to stay in the streets of this city at night." The men looked at him with serenity and replied, "Do not worry about us. We will spend the night in the square." But Lot, who knew well the darkness that covered Sodom when the sun was hiding, insisted urgently, "Please do not do it. I will prepare food for you. You will be able to rest, and tomorrow morning you will be able to continue your journey." The two men exchanged a look, and in the end they agreed. Lot led them to his house, feeling a little relieved. But there was something in the air, something strange, as if an invisible storm was forming. When he arrived, his wife received him with a slight inclination of her head. Although she had learned to tolerate her husband's eccentricities, her gaze revealed that she was not entirely content with receiving unexpected visits. Lot's daughters, two shy young women, began to prepare bread without yeast and some food while the men sat down. But while they shared the food, the tranquility of the night was interrupted. From the streets they heard footsteps, voices, and a murmur that grew with each second. Lot looked out the window and felt that his stomach was sinking. A crowd had gathered in front of his house. "Lot," shouted the men of Sodom, "bring out those men who have entered your house. We want to meet them." The word to meet them had a sinister tone, and Lot knew perfectly well what that meant. He got up with a pale face and walked towards the door, barely opening enough to leave. He closed the door behind him and faced the crowd. "My brothers," he exclaimed, raising his hands, "please don't do this evil. These men are my guests. They are under my protection." The crowd roared with anger, and some made fun of Lot. "Get out of the way, Lot," shouted one of them. "You are a stranger, and now you think you are our judge. If you don't do what we tell you, we will treat you worse than them." Lot swallowed saliva, feeling that his control over the situation was fading. In a desperate act, he raised his voice. "Listen, I have two daughters who have not yet met man. Let me bring them and do with them what you want. But please don't hurt these men." The crowd got even angrier, slamming the door hard. Lot knew he had lost control, but he was not willing to hand over the angels. Then, from inside the house, a bright light passed through the slits in the door. The angels opened it suddenly and pulled Lot inside. In an instant, the men outside went blind. They stumbled with each other, shouting and looking for the exit, but they could not see anything. Inside the house, the angels looked at Lot seriously. "Lot, listen carefully," they said, with a tone that made the soul tremble. "Take your wife and your daughters and get out of the city now. God has heard the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah, and judgment will fall on them at dawn." Lot, still shocked by what he had just witnessed, did not know what to say. Finally, with trembling hands, he began to prepare his family. His wife, pale as a sheet, could hardly move. The daughters were crying, clinging to their few belongings. But Lot was hesitating. Time was running out for him, and he could not decide what to do first. Finally, the angels, seeing his indecision, took him, his wife, and his daughters by the hand, and took them out of the city. When they reached the outskirts, One of the angels stopped and, with a firm voice, gave him a clear instruction. Run for your lives. Do not look back or stop in the valley. Run to the mountains, or you'll be destroyed along with the city. Lot, frightened, raised his voice. Lord, we will not be able to reach the mountains in time. Please, allow us to flee to that little city there, Zoar. It is close and we can be safe. The angels exchanged glances and finally said, All right, go to Zoar. But remember, do not look back. We cannot begin the destruction until they get there. And so Lot and his family began to run, leaving behind everything they knew. But as they advanced, Lot's wife, who was behind, began to feel an internal struggle. Each step he took seemed heavier. His heart was divided between the fear of what was coming and the attachment to what he left behind. Finally, he could not resist anymore. He stopped and turned his head toward Sodom. At that moment, when Lot's wife turned her head toward Sodom, the world seemed to stop. His heart, trapped between the past and the present, could not resist a desire to look at what he was leaving behind. As he did, a chill ran through his whole body. His feet became heavy as lead. His skin began to harden, and before he realized it, his whole figure was transformed into a statue of salt. The air around him was full of fire and sulfur that fell from the skies like a hellish storm. The light of the flames illuminated for a moment his motionless form, shining like a sad reminder of his disobedience. Later, Lot and his daughters continued to run. One of the daughters noticed that her mother was not there. Then she exclaimed, Dad, Mom is not with us. She shouted, with her voice broken by panic. Lot squeezed his teeth. His heart was filled with an indescribable pain. However, the words of the angels resonated strongly in his mind. Do not look back. Although every fiber of his being wanted to stop, he knew he could not. If he did, he would endanger his daughters and disobey the divine instruction. Keep running. He ordered them with a desperate cry. We cannot look back. We cannot stop. The daughters, between sobbing, obeyed, although in their hearts they felt an unbearable emptiness. The figure of his mother, now a statue of salt, remained behind motionless, while the storm of destruction consumed everything around him. Meanwhile, behind them, Sodom and Gomorrah faced the judgment of God. From the sky fell columns of fire and sulfur that hit the earth with force. The buildings, which once seemed imposing, collapsed under the weight of the flames. The streets were filled with desperate cries, but it was too late to repent. The ground trembled as if the same earth wanted to free itself from the corruption that had polluted it for so long. A thick cloud of black smoke rose to the sky, covering the valley like a mantle of death. The rivers, which used to be a source of life, boiled under the heat of the heavenly fire. From a distance, Abraham, Lot's uncle, observed everything from a high hill. He had interceded for Sodom, begging God to forgive the city if at least 10 righteous people were in it. But now he saw the smoke rise into the sky like the smoke of a giant furnace. In his heart, he trusted that God had saved Lot and his family, but he also understood the gravity of the sin that had led to that destruction. Lot and his daughters finally arrived in Zoar, a small town on the outskirts of the valley. They were exhausted, with their feet covered in dust and tears still fresh on their faces. The city was quiet, and although its inhabitants looked curiously at the newcomers, no one seemed to understand what had just happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot, without saying a word, fell to the ground next to a tree, with his head between his hands. His daughters sat next to him, hugging each other. After a few moments of silence, the eldest daughter spoke with a trembling voice. Dad, why did Mom look back? Lot slowly raised his head. His eyes were full of pain, and his voice was barely a whisper, because his heart never left Sodom. Although his feet followed us, his soul was still tied to everything we left behind. The daughters began to cry, and Lot, although he tried to stay strong for them, could not contain his own tears. He knew that the choice of his wife had been his, but that did not make the pain easier to bear. The night fell over Zoar, and as the sky darkened, the glow of the flames on the horizon still illuminated the valley. No one in the small town could sleep, because although they were far from the trial, the air still smelled of fire and sulfur. In the place where Lot's wife had looked back, his figure remained standing, motionless, turned into a statue of salt. The wind that blew from the mountains tore small grains from his body, but he was still there, as a sad witness of what had happened. Over time, the travelers who passed by the place began to tell the story. They say she is Lot's wife. They murmured. He could not leave life behind in Sodom, and that is why he was trapped there forever. The statue of salt became a warning to all. When God calls to move forward, do not look back. The past, as attractive as it may seem, cannot be compared to what God has prepared ahead. After a few days in Zoar, Lot began to feel restless. Although the small town was peaceful, something in his heart told him that it was not safe to stay there. Remembering the word of the angels, he decided to take his daughters to the mountains, where they could live in isolation and peace. There they found refuge in a cave, a humble but safe place. At night, when the silence of the mountains was almost absolute, Lot looked at the stars and reflected on what had happened. God saved us, his daughters told him, but not because we deserved it, but because of his mercy. Never forget that. The daughters, although they still felt the pain of loss, listened to their father's words and hugged each other, seeking comfort. The story of Lot's wife was recorded in the memory of all who heard it. His statue of salt, motionless in the valley, was a reminder that looking back, when God calls us to move forward, can have serious consequences. Lot and his daughters lived the rest of their days in the mountains, far from the corrupt cities, learning to trust in the ways of God. Although life was never the same again, they knew they had been saved for a greater purpose. And so, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah not only marked God's judgment on evil, but also his mercy in saving the righteous. Since then, future generations have remembered this story as a warning and a lesson. When God calls you, don't look back. What he has prepared is always better than what we leave behind.